Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. ABC.
Now warning lights are flashing down the quality control. Somebody drew a spanner, they threw him in a hole. There's rumors in the loading bay and anger in the town. Somebody blew the whistle and the walls came down. There's a meeting in the boardroom, they're trying to trace the smell. There's a leaking in the washroom, there's a sneaking personnel. Somewhere in the corridor, someone was heard to sneeze. Goodness me, could this be industrial disease? Caretaker was crucified and sleeping at his post. Refusing to be pacified, it's him they blame the most. Watchdog or rabies, the foreman got a falaise. Everyone concerned about industrial disease. There's panic on the switchboard.
Welcome to Dead Air Live. On tonight's program, we'll be exploring potential development opportunities for one of the most blighted neighborhoods in the city, and that's the Boynton Yards neighborhood. In fact, many long-time and lifelong residents of Somerville scarcely even know where Boynton's Yards are because they are a geographically and culturally isolated part of the city. They're located essentially behind Bradley's, bordered on one side by Medford Street, by the Cambridge and Somerville line on the southern border, Prospect Street to the west, and Somerville Avenue running through Union Square to the north. I think it's a neighborhood that's best described as part residential and part industrial wasteland. There are industries there, but the junkyards on Webster Avenue do border one side, and some of the industry in the area is not to the liking of some of the neighborhood's residents, who are now actually speaking out, both through a neighborhood task force and an advisory committee that's been formed by the city to figure out what should be done with Boynton Yards. The initial proposals focused almost exclusively on potential industrial development of the central core of the Boynton Yards area. I think now that the task force has gotten together many business, neighborhood, and housing forces in the city, as well as political participants, they are discussing housing and industry possibly in all parts of the 60-acre Boynton Yards neighborhood. And that's what will be decided over the course of the next several months and several years, perhaps. The basic questions, we'll have three guests on the show tonight, and the basic question they'll be answering and addressing is whether any development at all is feasible, and if so, what sort is best suited for this neighborhood. First, however, we're going to turn to a tape to hear what some residents of the Linden and Allen Street neighborhood have to say about the subject. Let's see the tape.
Okay, Marion Collins is a member of the City Task Force on the reuse of Boynton Yards. She lives on Linden Street right across from the new Somerville Police Station, and she's lived in the Boynton Yards all of her life. Ms. Collins, I'd like to ask you what it's been like living in this neighborhood and what kind of problems you've had here.
Well, before living here was not too bad. Things were pretty good. But lately, the last couple of years, it's very difficult living here. Too many factories, too much commercial trucks going up and down, cars going up and down all the time, and a lot of debris, always a lot of debris to clean up, inside the yard, outside the yard.
What sort of debris have people been leaving here, and who's been leaving it?
Before, you would say that it came from when Stop and Shop was there. People buy food, eat it on the way home, throw the papers on the ground and everything. Now, it just seems as if the cars come, and the people get out, and if they have any garbage, they just drop it. They don't care.
What types of problems have you experienced with the businesses in the industry that are in this neighborhood?
Well, before we didn't have hardly any problems with the industry, but now lately, especially the one on the corner there, the radiator shop, they would park the cars on any side of the street, repair them, let the oil go on the ground, and you would carry it into the house naturally as you walked in. But since, I must say the truth, since we have spoken to them repeatedly, they have stopped.
Okay. What do you see as the things that you want to have happen in this neighborhood in the next few years with the city's redevelopment?
Well, first we would like the zoning put back to residential, and we would like them to, whatever they do, a law or whatever you call it, that no more industry coming into this area. There is enough as it is. And we would like to see more decent housing for people.
Neighborhood's all right, but this is a little bit of work. Especially back here, that barrel place, it's really bad.
What kind of problems have you had from the barrel company?
Well, the whole place is falling over my head. If you take a look back there, you'll see it. It's really, they haven't done nothing yet. And I guess this is a commercial area here, and they're trying to stop that to go to commercial now, because we want houses around here.
Welcome back to the studio. My name is Laura Barrett, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and tonight's program is on the Boynton Yards neighborhood and the potential development of that neighborhood. As you just saw, some neighborhood residents are concerned about the existing conditions, and we'll be talking about what the neighborhood is like and what it could look like in the future with our three guests. I'd like to introduce first to my left Bob Callahan, who's the alderman from Ward 2 and is president of the Boynton Yards Advisory Committee. And that's not the full title, but essentially it's the advisory committee formed by the city to discuss the future of that neighborhood. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Laura.
Next to Bob is Beverly Lipinski, who is an Allen Street resident and I think fifth-generation resident of that neighborhood, or fourth generation, has been there a long time and is also a member of the advisory committee and very concerned about what happens there in the future. Welcome, Beverly.
Thank you, Laura.
And next to Beverly is John Taylor, who has president of the Somerville Corporation, has been involved in housing issues in the city in several different capacities. He is also president of the Somerville Homeless Coalition and is a member of the Somerville Housing Partnership and the Alderman's Housing Task Force. It's nice to have you here, John.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I wanted to, first of all, address my first question to Beverly, because as a neighborhood resident, I think you could best answer this for us. What is Boynton Yards like to live in that neighborhood?
It's a very difficult neighborhood to live in, and it's constantly changing. In the area that I live in, the Allen, Merriam, and Linden Street, we have 10 industries all packed into 3 very small streets. We have an 11th business that will probably be opening up within a month. It causes a lot of debris. We have a lot of toxic fumes, and our children can't even play in the streets anymore. We have a lot of traffic.
Now, when you say industry, what kind of industry?
Well, we have barrel yards that clean barrels, and people don't even know your property line if you don't have a fence up. We have junk car dealers that are constantly bringing fragmented cars down the street, leaving busted windshields and transmission fluid all over the place. We have a bakery. They're not too bad. We have a radiator shop that services cars out in the street and the sidewalks.
So is it essentially that you feel as if you're in the middle of this industrial hubbub and it's not a quiet, peaceful residential
anymore
type of neighborhood?
But like I said, it's constantly changing because more industry was coming in.
You mean it actually used to be different when you were growing up in that neighborhood?
Right. It was quieter. There wasn't as much industry, but as houses burnt down and lots became available, permits were given and more industry was let into the neighborhood.
Bob, as an alderman, how does that happen? I know obviously you haven't been there for the years of the changing of the neighborhood as a relatively new alderman. How is it a neighborhood can change like that without a city saying, wait a minute, what's happening here? Maybe we should put a stop to this.
Okay, Laura, well, I've only been an alderman for a short while, but I've been familiar with this area, and many friends of my family have lived in this area for many years. Before I was born, my parents lived on Linden Street. But so I'm familiar with the area and familiar with the problems. And we've become aware of it, and the city has allowed this to go on because the area has been zoned for industry and industrial uses for many years. And I first became probably really, eye opened wide because of a welding shop that was going in, and the neighbors were totally unaware that this could go on, and to find out that the residents were the non-conforming occupants of the area, and that the welding shop had more of a right to be there. Unfortunately, it's the zoning, and the zoning's been in place for many, many years.
Was this a recent development where the welding shop was trying to open up?
Right, the welding shop asked for a building permit, was granted a building permit under the current zoning. And unfortunately, the whole Boynton Yards area is zoned for industrial uses.
Now, I understand that in the current stage in the process, that's somewhat different. There is an interim planning process on tap right now.
Sure.
How does that work? And maybe we should just go back a little bit into history and say that, how did all this come to being? I know the planning office in the city decided this was something to look at, and a couple of years back, I understand, actually commissioned a study. Could you explain what came of that?
Right. One of the community development office basically has decided that it's time to now look at Boynton Yards.
The
Within
local
a few
developers,
weeks
you mean the same
of my
people that would...
inauguration, they contacted me and said, what are we going to do about this area? It was at that time that I became involved with the Merriam Street problem of the welding shop. And it was with my help and some of the neighbors, Beverly included, that we included the Somerville Avenue side of the Boynton Yards project into this, the other side of the railroad tracks. So the process has begun with a designation of the area, and then the most important part is the placing of that area under an interim zoning plan. And the interim zoning is nothing more than a temporary zoning for that area until final zoning can be made by the aldermen of the planning board. And the Boynton Yard Advisory Committee has been commissioned, again by the Board of Aldermen, in order to study this area and come up with that final recommendation for that area, in which the temporary zoning will be removed and final zoning will be placed on that area.
Okay, so that's the stage we're in now. It's all put on hold a little bit so this committee can look at the future development. John, how did you become involved in the whole process?
Well, of course, the Somerville Corporation, which I'm the director, not the president.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. But just the president of my board might have something to say about it. No, we have been involved in building affordable housing for some time in Somerville and have become highly sensitized to the issue of the changing character of real estate and as it relates to the affordable housing, whether it's home ownership or rental. So when vast or large tracts of land open up in Somerville, which is fairly rare given the density, we are extremely interested in any potential that might have for the development of affordable housing. So we approached the planning office nearly a half a year ago to discuss possibilities down there. As Bob said, they had looked at it initially in terms of a study which focused only on use of the site as an industrial site. But they were open to discussing other uses. Subsequently, they held 3 public hearings in which a number of neighbors, business people, elected officials, other interested people like myself attended these meetings, and from that group solicited people to be on this advisory group. And they felt that it made sense that I should be one of those.
Maybe you could explain a little bit what the Somerville Corporation is, because I think it's obvious that the corporation is going to be central to the whole discussion of the future of the Boynton Yards, and not everyone really knows what you do.
Well, Somerville Corporation is a 17-year-old community-based organization. It runs Project Soup, which is actually probably one of our more well-known programs. It runs a consumer protection program, a mediation program. It owns and operates the Somerville Multi-Service Center here in Union Square, and not only houses the programs I mentioned, but several other agencies, all of whom essentially serve special interests or groups of people who have special needs. The program that brings me here is our housing development program. It's essentially 6 years old, and in that period of time we have built 55 units of housing in Somerville. We've rehabbed some units, but most of them have been new units of housing for low and moderate income families. We're currently planning another development in East Somerville of 9 units, and we hope that if it makes sense to the advisory committee in economic sense that Boynton Yards will spell a major impact in terms of, or put a major dent into the issue of affordable housing in this community.
Okay. Speaking of affordable housing, Beverly, in the neighborhood that is currently existing, is the housing affordable? Is there a housing scarcity for the neighbor residents? I mean, for families who've lived there for a long time and the children grow up, can they find housing in that area?
No, it's very difficult. We have 2 pieces of property right now that are for sale on my street. The people that own them are very elderly and up in their years now, and I just can't believe the prices. They've been up for sale for 2 months. No one can touch them. $200,000 for a home.
Really, in that neighborhood, $200,000
is
for
a
a
lot
home.
of money, and then there's another house that was adjoining that's going for about $169,000. And if it's been up for sale for 2 months, as much as people need the housing, they just cannot afford the prices.
Yeah, exactly. John,
Well,
you were going to
not
say
only
something.
that, but that's why the Alderman's initiative, or the planning office, whoever had the initiative to do this interim zoning, makes a lot of sense, because in Beverly's case, and with other people in the Boynton Yards neighborhood, if a house burnt down, there's more of a right under the existing zoning to build an industrial plant or something along those lines than there is a residential, because it's not zoned for residential. So hopefully the aldermen have put a stop to that, and now there's going to be more sensible types of responses. You know, in fact, I think, didn't you have a vacant lot on your street that
Yes, we do. We have a
did it become was it a house at one time?
Yeah, it used to be a large block, probably a 12-apartment dwelling, and eventually with time and deterioration, it was gone. And we had the lot there for quite a while. It was purchased and then resold for an enormous amount of money. Then the lot was subdivided and half the lot was sold, and now they're building a carpentry shop.
So again, businesses.
And from what I hear from the owner of the carpentry shop, the other half was purchased, and they want to put some type of an electrical shop there.
So housing is diminishing and business is
Exactly.
increasing in that neighborhood, and that's exactly what this committee will be looking at and trying to figure out, is this a desirable way to go, or should we change the process and halt it in its tracks? Well, we have another tape that we'd like to go to now that will give us the opinions of some Horace Street residents. So let's see that tape.
The city has some plans to redevelop this area. What do you think the city should do here?
I don't know. Maybe clean up this place around here with barrels and, I don't know, the sewers, they sometimes smell a lot.
Yeah.
Have you had problems with backup?
Sometimes. Not really. Yeah.
Yeah, too much trouble. Look at that. Rats.
Rats.
This way.
You have
Yeah.
You have rats coming out of the barrel company?
Yeah.
Yeah. Vão para as salas. My God. Ai. O rato sai. Vão para as pessoas. Yes.
Have you talked to the people who own the barrel company about this problem? What do they say?
Yeah, diz que
No, they told us that it's just they're cleaning up the place and the rats are going everywhere, so,
vocês tiverem em casa rato com ratos em casa com baby.
Ah.
Diz. Yeah.
So they said there's nothing really they could do about it.
What did she say, your grandmother?
Yeah.
What did your grandmother say?
No, that we had a lot of rats in our house, too, it was a big
Yeah.
problem.
Right.
Dai. No arroz dela. Dai. O baby small. Too much smell. Oh,
Smells,
my God.
very bad because it's in between the walls and they're dead in there.
You have dead rats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If the city was to take this out, what do you think they should put in its place?
I don't know.
O quê?
Se a gente tirar aquilo, o que a gente ia botar ali?
Credo, se fosse uma coisa, se fosse o que fosse, se fosse iapos.
Whatever it
Mas
would be, it
crianças.
would be better than that,
Would you want to see more houses built here?
Mais casas.
Ok. Yeah. Dessa rosa, né? Yeah, diz assim, a vovó diz que vendia esta casa e vai para Portugal, que tem medo desses ratos que vêm
She
daí.
said that she would sell her house because of the rats, because she's really afraid of them. She'd do anything to get rid of this place.
Seja lá o que for que façam aí, seja o que for.
Whatever,
Yeah.
But do you think the city should build more houses here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Look at the garage. Look at that. My God, that's a garage. Too much junk. A key over there. Look at it.
What is that there?
It's a garage. They never clean it up. It's all messy there.
Look at that. Look. This way. Yeah.
Like cars used to be in there, you know, when there's a lot of oil and gas and everything. She's afraid someday, because a lot of boys come around here and play with fire, and she's afraid, you know, that...
Do they throw matches into here?
Not often, but
Yes,
a lot of
matches.
times.
Alan.
There's a lot of people who want to put more houses here, but the Chamber of Commerce wants to put more industry here.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to say with that. I think that's stupid because it's a lot of people around that got no houses, no place to live, right? The rent is too high today. You can afford $300, $400 for 2 or 3 rooms to put your kids, your wife, and, you know, I think his house is better than nothing else.
And they never clean, whatever they call that, they never clean that sewer either. In fact, they never clean the street. They'll come by here, they'll clean all the other streets, but over here they just go by it and we have to keep sweeping the streets ourselves. And for instance, this garage too is a habit of rabbits, rats going in and out. Terrible. I mean, we pay a high tax over here too. I should think, we should get like everybody else does, But, I don't know, it's just tough. I mean, it's a small street, and go to the alderman, he doesn't pay attention. You could call him up, but there's no results from it.
Have you talked to Bob Callahan, who's the ward alderman here?
Yes, we've called him up a few times and told him about the rats that we've been having. In fact, the house across the street there is full of rats. They have a dead rat in the house, and it smells the whole house there. And that's germs, for the little kids they have in there. But we haven't gotten any results around here.
What does Alderman Callahan say when you talk to him?
He says we'll do something about it. We'll put something down the sewer to stop it, but nothing has been done. But I mean, when you have to see a rat come in your house, really, that's terrible. Oh my God, I almost had a heart attack. Screaming and yelling and crying, really. But the lady across the street, she came in and she killed it. So we're very, you can't keep the doors open at all. You keep them shut, or else you'll get a rat coming in, That's from the building that was built over there. Since they, tore everything up, we've had the trouble of rats around here.
If the city has a choice whether to build housing or more industry on these streets here and on South Street and Ward Street and the other streets, what do you think the city should do?
Well, housing, I think, would be better. I should think so. Yeah.
Welcome back to the studio. That was one disgruntled resident of the Horace Street neighborhood, and talking about the problems and the rats in the neighborhood. I'd like to first address my first question to Alderman Bob Callahan, because this resident did say that she had contacted her local ward alderman. We don't know if she was talking about the current alderman, a past alderman, or even an alderman at large, but she did say she contacted an alderman about the problem and nothing was done. Do you have any response to that?
Thank you, Laura, for allowing me this time. I've never spoken with Mrs. DeRusso. I will work on this problem. I'd like to think that she's called the previous alderman. I'm not going to defend that I've only been on office 6 months, but I've never received a call from her. I have worked with the Board of Health on a sandblasting company that was on the corner of Harding and Horace. But I will get on this project, and in my own defense, I've never spoken with her on the phone, and I'd like to think that she called another alderman, but I'll nonetheless shirk my duties and get a hold of the Board of Health.
Well, I think people are also aware, or if they're not aware, they should be aware that you are president of this Boynton Yards, chairman rather, get the titles right here, of the Boynton Yards Task Force, or whatever the full title is, and so that obviously you have a concern and will be working on the problem, and maybe this woman, Mrs. DeRusso, will be contacting you in the future, and you'll have some answers you can give her, because obviously somebody calls you about rats. In some cases there isn't much you can do unless a full-fledged scheme is underway to clean up a neighborhood. So perhaps you'll have a chance to talk to her in the future.
Right, Laura. I think it's clear that the Boynton Yards area has time has come. It's a project. It's an area that's been neglected. The people's attitudes, and I've heard the gambit at the different public hearings we've had. Their opinions aren't unfounded. When they say they've called city administration, they have. They've been neglected. There's no question about that. I think, though, that now the project is ripened, something is going to be done, and I think that with us as members of the committee, as well as the other fine people that we have on the group, this area will be, let's say, straightened out once and for all, be redeveloped, and I'm sure and I hope that it will be much to the satisfaction of the current residents.
Well, that's good to hear. Beverly, what's your opinion, having seen this? Do you feel as if the city, and I don't mean to address it to the current alderman, but the city in general and the city's institutions and the political networks in the city have been responsive to neighborhood needs, or have they not been?
I really don't think they have. From my past experience and the experience of my mother, I'm talking about previous people in office, you always got the runaround, and that you'd call City Hall, you'd get one person, they'd give you another person, and so on and so forth.
So how do you feel about the current process that's now underway?
Well, hopefully the fact that the mayor and Alderman Callahan have made this advisory committee is a real positive thing with residents, and they're working with the people now. It speaks for itself.
Well, okay, then let's talk about some of the specific plans for this neighborhood. A lot of times, I think, if you see a neighborhood such as Boynton Yards and you see that there's industry that's been there for a long time and there's rats and sewage problems and really deep structural problems in the neighborhood, some people would feel like, can you even begin to make changes here? Is it even worth developing? Is there money available to improve the roads, the infrastructure, the sewage system? John, I know...
I don't think there's any choice. I think the question is, can you not do something about this? This is Somerville's demilitarized zone. For many people, it's uninhabitable. It's not something that other people in other wards would put up with. And Bob is right. He's kind of inherited a mess, but it's very obvious, at least from my conversations with him, that he plans on doing something about it. What can be done? There has to be a lot of considerations. It has to be a consideration of what obviously, and you've focused on that in your interviews, of what the neighborhood thinks. What would they like to see? That should be probably a primary consideration. Second is economics. It costs money to build roads and sewerage and bring in electrical and other utilities. It costs money to build housing. It costs money to do industrial development. Obviously, whether it's industry or housing, both of those are going to require some form of either state or federal assistance or both. Well,
let's talk about specifically then what could be done. I know some people have proposed that there should be just housing and get rid of all the industry in the neighborhood and take it over by eminent domain and clean it up and build housing. Other people, I think, have probably proposed that it should really be an industrial neighborhood primarily, and eventually, as the housing becomes vacant, take over that space and make it fully an industrial area to assist with the tax base or for whatever other purposes, assist with employment in the city. And other people have said that there should be some mix of both, as there is currently, but obviously not in a way that's satisfactory to the neighborhood. Some housing, some industry, perhaps cleaner industry or lighter industry, manufacturing industry. Of those three, are all three now on the table? I mean, it could go in any one of those directions, or is it already, are there cards on the table that it's going to be one way or the other?
No, I don't think the cards are on the table that it's going to be one way or the other. Many of the group have spoken in favor of housing. Many have spoken in favor of industry uses, economic development. But I think now that this group has come together and we've met once, I think there's a feeling that there can be a healthy mix. And it's always been my stand that we should put as much housing in that area as the area can support. With the area that is remaining, we do the light industry if we can. I know that the city needs business, needs economic development, needs jobs, but we've made a commitment with the Inner Belt Road area in Cobble Hill. And I think that where this area is already packed with housing, we should clean the area with housing, add housing, put nice buffer area between the two uses, industrial and residential, and this area will again thrive. You know, the people have spoken in favor of housing. I represent the people, and certainly there is a need for affordable housing in this city, and Boynton Yards project can now address that need.
How do you feel about that as laid out by the Alderman?
Well, I have to agree with the affordable housing. One thing, I was fortunate enough to buy my house, but many of my friends, like we're speaking about generations in neighborhoods, got married and lived with their parents for years to save money so that they could afford a home. And I think that's kind of sad. Young people can't even take that first step out on their own today without still depending on their parents for some help. I'd definitely like to see affordable housing as much as the area can support. But the first thing is to, you know, do the different testings that are necessary and to get the area cleaned up. But I think that the main thing over there is it's not so much the people that live there that are doing all the dumping. It's outsiders. They're in all hours of the night dumping.
So the illegal dumping is a serious problem there. Well, let me play devil's advocate for a minute then. If what you say is a primary concern is to get affordable housing, but first you have to clean up the neighborhood, do those in any sense work in contradiction to each other? If you clean up and improve a neighborhood and make it more attractive, don't housing prices generally go up? And how do you deal with that in a city where there is no rent control and there really is no way to control the costs of, you know, housing to buy? Do they contradict each other?
Well, I think at this time we just have to take one step at a time. I think that's too far to really think about. I think to have the land cleaned up, find out what's going to be done, and then at that point start thinking about housing. Of course, the other problem too is if they put housing, the schooling for the children, the city will have to pay for that.
Right.
So there are a lot of problems that are going to come up in the future.
We have to go to another tape in a minute, but I saw, John, you shaking your head at my...
I mean, that's the problem with this property now. You can't just think in terms of, let's clean it up and we'll worry about what to do after that. You know, I mean, you've got to have the longer range thinking, you know, and yeah, the city has to somehow, actually it's clear, through eminent domain and basically purchasing properties, they have to maintain or get ownership of this property. And once they have that, they can dictate what goes in there. And if they want affordable housing, we're not talking about a ghetto or slum or redoing any of the post-World War II projects. We're talking about, you know, affordable, nice developments which have a mixture of incomes. They certainly have that control. And we now have a mechanism within the city called the Somerville Housing Partnership, which has the ability to access a lot of the funds to make that sort of thing happen.
Are you talking about subsidized housing then? And is that a way it could be made affordable, or?
Well, subsidized, yes, perhaps a portion of it. Some of it offered at market rates. So what you do is you create a neighborhood that emulates or imitates the existing neighborhood. You don't put all low-income people, or all moderate, or all middle. You have a mixture of low, moderate, and even high income. And the higher incomes, units which you might sell or rent at market rates, those are used to subsidize some of the lower incomes, so that actually in that case there's no tax revenue being used. But you're simply passing along the wealth of someone else to make it more affordable for someone else. So
I see, sort of like a progressive income tax, or a housing tax, more
Sure.
or less. Okay, well, I think we should obviously talk more about that and more about the future of the neighborhood when we come back to the studio, but now we're going to go to our third and final tape, and this shows interviews with Tremont Street residents. Let's go to the tape.
What kind of problems have you had on this street?
Look around you. Our street's no good. Our storage is no good. Our cellars flood. We got buildings up. We don't know what they are
What?
or where they're coming from. Nobody notifies us about this building here. We don't know who's who or what's what. I was at the meeting before, and I brought this up at the meeting, and nothing seems to be done about it.
What's the cause of most of the problems here?
Nobody cares. Look around. Look at our streets. Our streets are caving in. Our storage. Look at our storage. We have mud. The water is in our cellars. We can't do anything with our cellars anymore. Look at the junkyards around us. Would you want to live like that? It's bad. Look at the people's houses. They're fixing them up. Everybody's getting disgusted. I don't want to fix my house up no more because there's nothing to stay here for. And I've been here 37 years, and he was born here.
Have you talked to Alderman Callahan about this?
Yep, at the meeting.
What has he told you?
They're supposed to come down here, and I haven't seen them yet. But I am going to call them. I am going to call them Monday morning. Because, like I said, there's a building going up, and what is it?
Okay.
And it's this whole area. It's disastrous. You know, it's terrible.
Why do you think the city is neglecting this area when it's putting so much money into Union Square and Davis Square?
I don't think they care. I don't know why they're neglecting it. I really don't. But it seems like nobody cares. We've had this in the paper. We've had photographers down here before to take. We had rowboats out in the street. When there's a bad rainstorm, you cannot get down the street. This street, Prospect Street, and Norfolk Street, it's terrible. The storage is so bad.
If these problems were happening on Winter Hill or Spring Hill, do you think the city would let it get this bad?
No doubt, no doubt. They would not let it go like this. It's only this area that is. Look around. You have to be blind not to see what we're living into. Look at that junkyard side of me, in back of me, on the other side of me. I mean, I'm surrounded by them. And I mean, I know businesses that people got to live, but so do we. You know, so do we have to live. But I don't care. I'm getting just totally. Look at the streets. They're all caving in. All our streets are caving in. Nothing done down here.
What do you want?
We even get our streets cleaned.
Have they ever posted no parking signs for street cleaning here?
Blue moon, not very often. How could you? There's too many cars. I think they should go into towing the cars in the street if they don't move on one side. I think they should, like they do in Cambridge.
What was this neighborhood like when you moved here 30 years ago?
37 years. It was a nice neighborhood. It was. Now, there's very few people around here that lived here on the street for quite a while. There's only maybe, Christine's here maybe 20 years. We got another woman that was born in this street. Another woman over there has been here 25 years. But they're all moving away. People don't want to stay here.
What was here before the junkyards?
Oh, it's always been there was a house here. There was a house in the front and a house in the back. And then when they deteriorated, they tore them down, and this is what we got here. They could have put a house in here, too. I mean, Jesus, who the hell needs any more industry? Who needs any more business down this small little street? I mean, we want to see kids and families. We don't want to see a bunch of junkyards. Or if they want business, fine. But limit them. Don't overdo it. It's getting out of hand. It really is. You know, it really stinks. It really does. You don't want to stay in Somerville anymore. You really don't. As much as I hate to give them the satisfaction of moving, sometimes you want it. But needless to say, it's my house now, and I'll stay here. You know. But I hope all the people pull together and try to get this street at least back to where it was. You know. And it's always been a good street. If you look up in the police records, they've never had much trouble on this street at all. It's really too bad. It's just too bad industry has taken over the world, you know. So that's all I have to say.
Okay.
Welcome back to the studio. We're discussing the Boynton Yards neighborhood, and I would now like to address a question to John Taylor about housing, not just as it affects this neighborhood, but the city as a whole. Why is it so important to develop more housing, in your opinion?
Well, I could give you statistics of what's happened to the housing market in the last 5 years, you know, which essentially that rents and home ownership costs have literally gone up hundreds of percents in that time period. I can tell you that the city's vacancy rate is less than 1%. I can tell you that the majority of people who are now buying in the city are people who are buying from the outside. I can tell you about third and fourth and fifth generation people who cannot afford to live and cannot afford to own homes. But I don't need to tell you all those things because the reality of the situation is that people who live here know this. You've heard Beverly. You know how much your rent is. You know how difficult it is to find a home. Yes, Boynton Yards, because of the gigantic size of it and the potential of it. I mean, some people have talked about 300 units of housing. That would put a major dent in the affordable housing problem. You have people all over this community when we did the northeastern townhouses, we had 500 applications for 32 units. And that was out without really major advertising.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure that if we built a lot of units in here, we would literally have thousands and thousands of Somervillians who would really love to live in.
Well, let me pick up on that point, and also address this question to the ward alderman. Before we go to the next segment, which I should explain at this point, we're going to have neighborhood residents also addressing their questions to the guests here tonight, as well as have telephone calls. The number for people who want to call in is 628-8826, and we'll be taking those calls in a couple minutes. But first of all, Bob, what's to say that if housing is built, that Somervillians will get that housing? Aren't there laws against discrimination or various laws that make it impossible to designate housing for Somerville residents?
Well, I think with some of the things that Community Development Corporation has done in the past, I think it is legal to restrict where the residents will come from. I know they just did a project on the Marshall Street site of the Northeastern, and it was for Somerville residents. Most 30 some odd, only a couple were non-Somerville residents. And no, I think it can be a project for Somerville residents. And you know, as John speaks, he is a housing advocate. I am the chairman of this advisory committee. I am a member of the Board of Aldermen. It is necessary for me, I feel, to remain impartial and try to run these meetings and run the advisory committee. I do, however, favor affordable housing, naturally, and I will work for housing. The important thing is here that we keep on the even track, we explore every possibility, and we look to the optimum solution.
Well, very good. And why don't we give a neighborhood resident then a chance to ask you, whoever he wants to ask, a question about the housing and issue in the neighborhood. His name is John Berdulis, and if you would please step up to the microphone, John. We'll take your question for the guests, and they'll answer it, or you can sit right where you are.
First of all, I'd like to ask Mr. Callahan, our alderman, where the city has already done a study on the industrial side of the question about what to do with the Boynton Yards area. When or are they ever going to do a housing study to, you know, equal in value to the money that they spent on the industrial survey that was done back in July of, what was it, 83? And, you know, it seems to be getting worse and worse. And the residents down there, I'm a resident of 34 Merriam Street, and the residents for years, 20 years that I know of, have been, you know, living in a hell down there. It's it's really not fit to live in, but, you know, somehow you just try and you try and you try, and you complain and you complain and you complain. And as, you know, as things are progressing, it's a wonderful idea that the city has taken a closer look. But when there's industry going in there, you know, right now, more industry going in there, you know, I just don't see, you know, where everything is going to end up for the people.
Okay, so I guess in a nutshell then, the question to you from John Berdulis is when and if and when is the city going to study housing in the same way that the city studied the possibility of industrial development?
Okay, Laura, what John is referring to is the study that we did the city did on exploring the area for industrial uses. And that was because the area was zoned industrial. It was mainly industrial, and that was the initial plan or the initial outlook. Much of that study, however, was on the ground, the infrastructure, the sewerage, all of this type of problems, the roads, the traffic patterns that are existing now. Much of that study would be duplicated in a project for affordable housing. It is my opinion that this project has been slowed, delayed several months. As I mentioned, within 2 weeks, I was working with community development on this project, and here it is, July, and we still haven't had an official meeting of the Boynton Yards Advisory Committee. The city has many professional planners in the community development office, as well as many experts in housing, such as John Taylor of the Community Development Corporation. I don't think that there is time or money to be used at this stage. The professional people in community development, I feel, along with community development groups like John Taylor's group, can develop the area for housing. Much of the study on for industrial uses can be used, again, with all the infrastructure, the traffic, and many of those problems. So as far as the same amount of money and the time, the project has been delayed too much now. The governor keeps talking about monies for cities and towns. Let's get the money before the governor gets reelected and this money's used for something else.
Okay, then, Bob, I think you're saying then you think there's resources within the city to examine and explore housing possibilities in the future, and you don't need to hire another firm to come in and tell the city that they need housing or how to do it. But that I think the neighbors want to hear that that kind of planning, be it internal or external, is actually happening and going to happen. The study that came out that did explore some of the infrastructure questions, John, I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but from what I've heard, there's some questions about whether the Lincoln Park School and the neighborhood school in the area could accommodate a large influx of new residents, children, to the school. Is there a problem?
Well, I did see the study, and actually, of course, our school population continues to decrease, and I have talked with some of the school committee members about this issue to find out, to get their insight. What happens in that instance, whether it's any neighborhood where it increases substantially, in the northeastern townhouses, 94 or 92 children ended up moving into that neighborhood in a period of just a few months. What they did in that case is they ended up keeping a classroom open that they otherwise would have closed and keeping a teacher or two on that they otherwise would have laid off. So that's how they responded to that. And I asked them, well, what would happen in an instance, say, if the city and the neighborhood advisory group recommended that there be substantial housing developed, 200-300 units of housing, meaning thousands of children. And their response to that is, well, what happens in any instances, what they do is they look at the schools as a whole and figure out where the population is, and they divide the population up according to that. In other words, it may be that some of the special classes that they have in the Lincoln Park School would be held in another school, the Cutler or where have you, in order to accommodate the larger neighborhood. That would be, the school committee would simply look at the resources it's had and has and react accordingly.
Okay, very, very good. I understand we do have a phone call. I wanted, we don't have a phone call. Okay, the phone call no longer exists, but I do want to announce the phone number. It's 628-8826, and everybody is welcome to call in, ask questions of the guests here, or just make a comment of your own about the neighborhood and what you think should happen there. I'll repeat again, it's 628-8826 here at the Somerville Community Access Television Studios. We have a second guest in the studio audience who I'd now like to ask to step up to the microphone, and that's Tom Bergendahl, who I understand has been involved in this process as well. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Laura. It's good to be here. I have been, as people in the audience know, active with the Ward 2 Boynton Yards Neighborhood Task Force on trying to educate neighbors about the whole planning process in Boynton Yards. I would like to see a major emphasis on housing and cleaning up the area. My question, I think, is primarily to John Taylor. It's a question about getting affordable housing. I've seen affordable housing occur in other developments. Tent City is one of the current ones that's happening in Boston. There they are putting in something like 25% low income, 25% moderate income, and 50% moderate income and 25% upper income or market level. I wonder if John could tell us a little bit about the whole concept of limited equity home ownership.
Sure. Well, Alderman Callahan said it himself when he said that there is a considerable amount of money that the governor has set aside. We should try and get our hands on that before the election, but there are a lot of initiatives. This is, in terms of housing development, it's a prime opportunity. The Massachusetts Housing Partnership has access to $300+ million for affordable housing development, as well as there being a number of existing programs to to help people to be able to afford homes. There is locally, the mayor and the planning office have formed the Somerville Housing Partnership. They will act as a local conduit to access a lot of those monies. Tom asked about limited equity provisions. Limited equity provisions essentially limit the equity that a homeowner has or a renter has. Primarily it's home ownership, but it limits their ability to resell. So in other words, you're not creating affordable housing for an elderly or a family and then having them a year later sell it off for a profit. There's a number of mechanisms that are available that we have employed, that a number of other community development corporations in Massachusetts have employed. Yes?
Okay, rather than get into too much more detail, because we're running out of time, and I think that that answers the question in essence, although I'm sure there's a lot more to be said about it. I don't want to focus the discussion exclusively on housing, because I think that the guests here and the questions from the studio audience have all been geared towards what kind of housing, where's it going to come from, and isn't that just what's needed? I don't know which of you could best answer this question. If you could at least let people know what are the arguments for more industry, if not that you necessarily have to be a proponent of that, but obviously the existing businesses would probably like to say, we don't want to be taken over and we think this is a good place to operate, and perhaps other businesses would like to move into the area. Perhaps Bob, as the ward alderman, you could just say what those arguments are.
Well, there are several businesses in that area that are a detriment and a hazard to the area. There's no question about that. But there are a few businesses, I should say several businesses, that are somewhat of an asset to the community, and they will work to develop their property and take much better care of their property, given that the city makes an effort to the surrounding area. One that comes to mind is Arrow Paper. They're a good company, and they'd like to stay. They've even talked about the fact that they may be relocated to another area of the Boynton Yards. That's not a problem with them. There are several companies in there that are good. There's a company, Science Research, if I can name it. It's a one building operation. It's a research and development company. There's no, let's say, is the problems with that area, junk cars, let's say. It's not that type of an industrial use. That's a company, that's an economic development type of company that we would like to see.
So what's the benefit to having business? Who benefits by it?
Well, the city benefits in the taxes. People benefit in it from jobs, and those are the two main concerns for the let's say the Chamber of Commerce type people.
Now, Beverly, as a resident of the neighborhood, you've obviously addressed the need for more affordable housing. I don't know if any of your neighbors have problems with employment, but that's also obviously a problem amongst many people, and also in working class neighborhoods, people not finding enough work. Do you think there's any argument to be said for opening up more businesses there, particularly of the so-called clean sort of business that wouldn't be a detriment to the neighborhood, but that might provide employment, if not specifically to the neighborhood, but again be a societal benefit as a whole?
Okay, well, let's say that, and I have talked to the people in the neighborhood, okay, there might be 1 or 2 people that are looking for a job out of probably 100, but out of those 100 people, at least 80 of them do not own their houses, are paying a lot of rent. So I don't think that the unemployment rate is that high and that people are really looking for jobs. I think they're looking for the housing.
So housing is the priority.
But they will, you know, when the Boynton Yards is redeveloped, though, they will accept a mix of light industry and housing. That's what they talk about.
Do you think that the neighborhood, I know there's sort of 3 distinct neighborhoods in the Boynton Yards area, are the neighbors unified in their opinions about this, or are there a lot of differences of opinion?
I think they're unified. The main thing is that they want to get rid of all these hazardous type junkyards, buildings that are causing smelly odors, that are filthy and dirty. That's basically what everybody wants, is to get rid of those sites, the sites that are blighting our area and our homes.
I just want to say we only have another minute left in the show, so I want to sum up briefly by asking you all if you could, as succinctly as possible, say both what you think are the immediate short-term, something that should be done to the neighborhood, and one good long-term goal that you want to accomplish. Well, by long-term, I mean by, say, the end of the summer, to have accomplished in the planning process to establish something for the future. Again, we've got to keep it short. Bob.
I'd first like to remove some of the rodent problem and, again, street cleaning, that kind of thing. The nuts and bolts issues that have not been provided to this area. And as well, as far as the end of the summer, the Boynton Yards Advisory Committee will be meeting a couple times before the end of the summer. I hope that we can work together and be well on our way to designating different areas for housing and urban renewal.
Thank you. Beverly.
Okay, I'd like to see neighbors start working a little bit closer together and helping keep their neighborhood clean and keeping people out from dumping. And eventually, I'd like to see the new generation of people be able to live where they were born and raised with their families.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, I'd like to see the area cleaned up for the people who are living there now. I'd like to see more, I agree with Beverly, more people who are going to be affected by whatever happens down there become involved in the process. I'd like to see the advisory committee come out with some recommendations for doing something with that area, and I'd like to see, probably this should have come earlier, a freeze on any further development whatsoever until the advisory committee makes its recommendations.
Very good, thanks very much. And just one last question then to Bob. If a neighbor wants to express an opinion about this, or if anybody in the city wants to be involved in the process, who should they call?
Okay, as one of the, both women spoke, recalling their alderman, they should call the alderman of Ward 2. My name is Bob Callahan. My phone number, which I gladly give, is 666-4390. They should call me. If they're unhappy with calling me, they can call the City of Somerville, City Hall, and be referred to whatever department their problem is best, would be best handled. Believe me, I like to think that these people have called past administration, and that I would hope that they would call me in the future.
Thank you very much. Again, our guests have been Bob Callahan, the alderman from Ward 2, Beverly Lipinski, a resident of the Boynton Yards neighborhood, and John Taylor, director of the Somerville Corporation. And again, the phone number to call if you want to reach Bob Callahan and become involved in the process, it's 666-4390. I'm sorry we don't have that on our screens, but I'm sure if you call City Hall at 625-6600, you can talk to the planning office, the mayor's office, or get Bob's number there and become involved in the process. For Dead Air Live, my name is Laura Barrett. Thank you.
Flashing down the quality control. Somebody threw a spanner, they threw him in the hole. There's rumors in the loading bay and anger in the town. Somebody blew the whistle and the walls came down. There's a meeting in the boardroom, they're trying to trace the smell. There's a leaking in the washroom, there's a sneaking personnel. Somewhere in the corridor, someone was heard to sneeze. Goodness me, industrial disease. Caretaker was crucified, sleeping in his post. Refusing to be pacified, it's him they blame. damages, and everyone agrees that